In this video, we're going to begin creating the details for the center section of our Rotiform LHR rim. Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and in this video we're going to carry on with our Rotiform LHR custom wheel in Fusion 360. Now at this point we've done quite a bit of work. We've got the front and rear section of the rims and the center section or hub section. We're going to begin adding the details. So if you have been following along, go ahead and use your own design, but you can also go to the description and download the one that we're working on here. We want to begin by taking a look at the last canvas that we added, which was the Rotiform LHR welded two-piece. What we want to do from here is we can hide the front and rear lip. We don't need to see those, but we want to begin by creating some of these patterns on this rim. Now, one of the things we need to do is we need to figure out how many of them are patterned around. So let's go ahead and just begin counting. So it looks like, at least for this larger section, we have 21. So that means 21 of these large sections and 21 of these small ones. Obviously less for the other geometry. You can see that it kind of falls in between them. So we want to get started by first creating these two outside shapes. When we look at the wheel from other angles, these appear to just go straight through. They don't look like they have any taper, or there's not really anything major about the way that they're done. So we can just go ahead and start creating a new sketch. We're going to use this right plane, which is the YZ plane, and we want to begin sketching. Now, something that we need to keep in mind is that none of these line up perfectly with our vertical axis, which we have to keep that in mind because when we're sketching and patterning these, we really want to look for symmetry wherever possible. Now, when we look over here on the right-hand side, we can see that the x-axis, now when we're looking at these, we've got red and green, x and y. It doesn't match up with our coordinate system in the view cube. And that's just because in a 2D sketch, it's always going to have our x and y, even if we're using a YZ plane here. But as we look, you can see that this is probably the closest. Comes pretty close to splitting through this little design feature here. And you can also see that the little lip in the dish that we created lines up pretty well with that feature on the rim itself. So you can see we did a pretty good job here. But since this one's pretty close, I'm going to be modeling this right here. Now, typically I like to work vertically, but again, we're gonna do this one here. Now, if you do like to work vertically and the image isn't quite lined up, again, we can always go back and modify these. They're not linked to anything. They happen early on in the timeline, but we can go in, we can rotate it 90 degrees or whatever we need to do. Won't really matter in the end, so let's just go ahead and work from here. Again, I like to use construction geometry. It's not strictly required, but I'm going to go ahead and make a construction line here, and then I'm going to continue it on to here and say, okay, hit escape. Go ahead and turn these into construction, either using X on the keyboard or the line type option in the sketch palette. And then I want to give it a dimension. So D on the keyboard, I'm going to make this one 5.0625. And let's go ahead and make this one 1.92. Again, I'm just picking numbers based on roughly where they fall. Now, when we're modeling this, we should keep in mind the fact that we've got 21 instances of this, which means that this needs to fall at the correct position. So if we bring a calculator out and we take 21 and we divide it by 360 divided by 21, we're 17.142 degrees to get to there. So how do we deal with that? Well, we make another construction line coming from the origin, and we'll simply carry this out. So again, these will be construction, X on the keyboard, dimension, we're going to hit D on the keyboard, right click, aligned, and we'll just give it a value. 6.275 is probably okay. Again, right click and aligned. We want to make sure that we're dimensioning along the length of the line. 0.715, that should be okay. And then if we go to here, you can see that that's 8 degrees. Now, when we measured 360 divided by 21, the number of instances around, we actually got 17 degrees, right? So not quite, but this is about half of that. So what we're going to do is we're going to put some brackets. We're going to say 360 divided by 21, and then we're going to divide that by 2. So you can see that that puts us at about the right position. And we don't have to use the calculator values, which are out to many decimal places. It automatically is going to round it for us. So while it's not perfect, again, we are dealing with reference images, and you can see that our center one here isn't perfect either. So now we have to make some decisions about how we're going to make this work. Because we have some reference lines. Obviously, this one's going to be fully modeled. This one's going to be mirrored. But we have some arcs here. And the way that I'm going to go about this is, again, I'm going to use some construction lines. I'm going to make a vertical construction line here. I'm going to make a vertical one here. Again, turn them into actual construction lines. You can do this before. If you turn it to construction before you start sketching, then you don't have to go back and convert them. But I don't like to do that because oftentimes I forget to turn it off, and then I just have to undo it. It's much quicker for me just to hit X on the keyboard to turn it back and forth. And that's the default shortcut key, is just X on the keyboard. So the reason I did this is because when I start to sketch an arc, what I can do is that arc can become tangent to my construction line. Now, of course, we could model the entire thing, and we could use fillets and just have the fillets go across that edge. But if we're trying to mirror something, then using that method of having those construction lines for tangency can be pretty helpful. So let's go ahead and use an arc here and go ahead and bring that back. And then we want to make sure we go back and add tangency between these. So there are arcs that are tangent arcs. If you come in here, you could pick the tangent arc option. But when we're adding it after the fact, sometimes it just doesn't work out. You just need to be aware of when you do have tangency and when you don't. So this looks pretty good. We've got tangency with our reference lines. Before I fully dimension this, I'm going to use the mirror option. I'm going to select everything I want to mirror. And then I'll select my mirror line, which is this construction line, and we'll say OK. Now, it's still underdefined, but we can move things around and we can sort of play with the shape and get it right. Now, the reason that this is important is because this shape isn't perfectly aligned with our reference. So we're not going to be able to perfectly match it here. What we want to do is we want to get the intent right. So once I'm happy with the way that it looks in relation to the image, then I want to start dimensioning. Again, D on the keyboard, I'm going to put an angle in here. 48 degrees looks about right. I'll put an angle in here. 21 degrees. It says it's over constrained, so I'll hit cancel. I'm going to add a radius value. Let's see, 0.25. That's probably about right. Let's go ahead and add a radius value here. 0.3 is probably okay. This one, I'm just going to use whatever value it has. And then let's see what can still move. Okay, so you can see that it doesn't have tangency here. So let's make sure that we do add it, make those tangent, and let's see what else can move. So this can still float around a bit. So let's try once more. Let's try to add that angle. And let's just say OK. All right, so now that gets us pretty close. And here's the next important bit. So over here, we've got a line that is going to be parallel to this. And the reason that this is important is because that parallel nature means that when these things mirrored, that spoke width is going to be consistent. And I'm going to come out from here, make sure that these are perpendicular. And then again, I'm going to place that reference here, make sure it's construction. So that way I have tangency for that arc. So this one is fixed here. We're going to have an arc between it and an arc between it, and then we'll mirror that one as well. So again, I'll go to 3-point arc. From here to here, I pull it out so that's tangent, here to here, tangent. We'll add tangency to that one and to this one. Make sure that these are parallel, and then we can dimension it however needed. So radius value, I'm not too concerned about these values because really all I'm looking for is that it visually looks right. If we were trying to model this again for production, then we would be more careful because we would want the radius values to be easily machined. For example, you wouldn't want to make something that was difficult to machine. All right, so now that we have our first sketch, let's go ahead and just take this as an extrusion. After you select a profile, you might need to hold down Control or Command. For the distance, I'm going to say through all, and for the objects to cut, make sure it's only cutting through the hub. So once we cut through the hub, I am, before I ever go in and pattern this, I'm going to add a small cosmetic fillet to the front lip. I'm going to say 0.1. That looks pretty good. It's probably a bit bigger than it needs to be. Actually, let's go ahead and do it's a little bit smaller, 0.05. So now when we, let's go ahead and Control Z, undo that if you accidentally click that. Let's go ahead and do Create, and we want to go to a circular pattern. We're going to set the pattern type to Features. We're going to select our Extrude cut, which was through all, and our fillet on those edges. The axis of revolution, I'm going to select something on the body itself. Of course, I could use the x-axis, but I'm going to select a circular reference edge on the body, again, so that it's always contained on it, and then I'm going to put 21 for the pattern number. From a right-hand view, that looks pretty good. You can see that these are parallel. Again, that's important. That's the reason why we mirrored it. We used the reference line, that construction line, which was 360 divided by 21 divided by 2. And again, that's because we're dealing with a half here. And we'll say OK. It's got to compute all of the fillets and all the extrudes. And when we look at the results, that looks pretty good. Now, we can tell right away that this shape is probably a bit too extreme. Like the amount of material left between here it looks a bit less than what's left between here. So visually that doesn't look right. And if that's the case, we can always modify that sketch. First, let's rename the sketch. I'm going to call this Hub First Extrude. And then I'm going to right click and I'm going to edit the sketch. Another thing that we can do, and this might be a good way to show this, let's finish the sketch. Let's show it, right click, and let's show the dimensions. The reason why this might be helpful is because we can change this on the fly. Let's say 47 degrees. And then when we hit enter, it's going to recompute the sketch. It's going to recompute all the features. Sometimes it won't actually allow you to make those changes. It's going to be partially based on some of the other values. We can reduce this, let's say 0.25 instead of 0.3. That might buy us a little bit more width here between them. And you can see actually I went the wrong way, 0.35, I'm sorry. So that'll buy us a little bit more width between the spokes. And visually what I'm looking to do is to make this distance here about the same as that distance. And that looks a little bit better. I'm happy with that. So now we can hide that sketch. We can bring back our canvas. And of course, let's make sure that we do a quick intermediate save so we don't lose anything. And the next thing we want to do is we want to take a look at this, the sort of the next cuts that we need to make. We have cuts here and we have cuts here. But sitting here looking at the image, I used 21 instances and it appears that the number is wrong. So you can see that they're not lining up as they go around, which means that it's probably 20. So let's make an edit to this pattern. Let's adjust it to 20. And 20 looks a little bit closer. You can see that there are some differences. It's not quite the same. But again, we're really looking for a visual representation. It doesn't necessarily have to be a perfect match. But what we want to do is we want to make the essence of the rim match. So I think I'm going to stick with 20. However, we have to remember that this extrude here, or the angle for this, was created based on 21 instances. So I'm going to modify this. I'm going to set that value to 20, which is going to move the angle or the position of that cut, and that's going to keep it consistent. So again, going back to that same thing where we use change parameters, if you want a design to be easily updated and you have a number of instances, in this case for these cutouts, for example, then that's something that you would want to dictate in the parameters. That way, everything that's related to it updates. The next thing that I want to do is I want to create another new sketch. Again, I want to make sure that I use this plane. And if we're having trouble selecting it, hold down the left mouse button and pick the plane. And then now we need to figure out, these other cuts that we want to make. So again, they should be the same number. We could have theoretically done them all in the same sketch, but I think the process is complicated enough that sometimes it's good for us just to make sure that we expand on it. But I do want to come back and I do want to bring this in as a projected reference by holding down P. I'll do it for that as well. And then hide that sketch. The reason I like bringing that in as a projected reference is because if I ever go back and change the angle for this one here, again, like if I change it from 21 to 20, then it's going to change the location of this opening. I do, however, want to explore using points in this case instead of using the reference lines like I created originally. We do want to still make sure that these are construction, so X on the keyboard. And now for the dimension, I'm going to go from the origin, which will automatically make it aligned. And then I can go between these 2 points. I'm going to right click, make this one aligned, and I'm just going to use that value. So now you can see that we have sort of an arc, a very small flat, and these are basically some big arcs. So again, for manufacturing purposes, we would use all arcs and straight lines. For a visual reference, we could come in and we could use a spline. So we can pick the points that we want. I'm going to go to here for sure. And then we could mirror this, or we could come back and we can complete the whole thing. Any of these methods are going to be fine. Since I'm sort of stuck in the manufacturing mind, I want to go ahead and I just want to use arcs and straight lines, making sure that it is manufacturable to a certain extent. So again, construction lines, references, I'm going to draw straight lines wherever I need them. I'll draw one over here, and then I'll draw arcs between them. So again, we'll put an arc here, we'll put one here, and then lastly, we'll put one here. Again, we'll come back and make tangency here, and make sure that one's tangent. So now that we have that reference, we're going to mirror. We'll select each thing that we want to mirror, and then make sure that we go across a mirror line. So this line looks like I accidentally selected it when I wasn't on mirror, so just go back and say OK. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through and dimension all of this. I strongly suggest that you do take the time to do it. But just for our purposes, I'm going to go ahead and just sketch the rest of this. Again, construction lines here, wherever we need them. Make sure that they're construction. And then we're going to put our straight lines. We're going to put a small one here, and we'll put a small one here, keeping with those same shapes. And it's important that we use references like parallel between these. We want to make sure that those are parallel if they are in the design, right? So these are design elements that we want to make sure that we keep. This one here, I'm going to make parallel with that line. And then I'll put some arcs between them. Again, 3-point arc, 3-point arc here, and one here. And then I'll just go back and make sure that they are tangent. Keeping in mind that it's going to automatically alter some of these for me based on those references, the parallel. I might need to reduce the size of this arc by moving it around. And if there's anything that we want to stay fixed, for example, that value, we can partially dimension some of it. We can dimension the distance between points, for example. I'm going to add some of these dimensions simply because I'm not going to manually pick them. I'm just going to use them to help drive the shape. You can see that just with a few clicks, we fully defined it. Then I'm going to go ahead and mirror this. A lot of times, the actual work that takes place is just, it's not very interesting. So sometimes we'll speed through and do things like that. But next, extrude, hold down Control or Command, and you'll notice that it's not letting me select this profile. Sometimes when a sketch is hidden, it might not do it, but in some cases, it might not actually be connected. So if it doesn't let you select that profile, that means there's something wrong in the sketch. It means I want to go back and I want to make sure that this sketch is closed. And one thing you'll notice is if we zoom in here, these points are not actually coincident. So I need to make sure that these points are coincident. Now these two are mirrored, but they never sort of made their way to be coincident with that. Sometimes it's important to note that sometimes the coincident relationship just means that something is going to extend, like an arc might extend, until it hits a specific point. So you can see that that sort of ruined that edge. So I'm going to Control Z, and I need to fix this. I don't want to just add a fake line in there because then the tangency won't be right. What I really want is for this point to come all the way here. So I'm going to just drag it and snap it, and then that should give me the close profile. When you're working in Fusion, sometimes the canvases can be tough, sometimes solid bodies can be tough, but if you can't select a profile here in the sketch when you have show profiles turned on, that means that the extrude is not going to work. So make sure that that's the case. I'm going to take both of those profiles. I want to extrude them both up. So again, hold down Control or Command. Distance will be through all. Objects to cut is just the hub, which is the only one visible. And then we can say OK. Once again, I'm going to add that small fillet. And really, a lot of times these fillets are just a product of the manufacturing method. Sometimes they are design elements. But generally, we don't want sharp corners on forged parts or castings. So those are going to be a product of the design. So we're going to go ahead and do another circular pattern. Come down, pattern, circular pattern. The axis of revolution, again, I'm going to pick a circular edge on the solid body. I'm going to do 21 instances, or I'm sorry, 20 instances in this case, and we'll say OK. So now we're getting really close to that mesh design. We have to let it compute the extrudes. But if we use Control and 4 on the keyboard, you can see that that looks pretty good so far. We've done a lot of work. We can bring the front and the rear lips back, and that looks pretty close to our end result. We don't have the bolts here. Again, the original design that I'm looking at is welded together, not bolted together, but we drew it as the bolted together version. But there's just a few more things that we have to do here. I'm going to use Control or Command and 6 on the keyboard to bring back my edges, my shading. And you can see that we just have like this little dot that happens here. We've got these two little cutouts that happen. And then we've got obviously the center cap and the area for the lug nut. So there's still a good bit of work to do. This is probably a good time for us to just save our work to make sure that we don't lose anything. But so far, so good. Everything looks really solid. The design looks good. It seems to match what we're trying to do. So let's make sure that we make that save. Ask any questions you have. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.